And I will call on Marilyn.
Hi, I'm Marilyn Franklin, and I teach Sunday school at Congregation Shalom. And I come to learn from Sippy, who always has something new to teach. So thank you. Did we get everybody?
I will go next. My name's Ariana. I teach 6th and 7th graders at Congregation Sinai.
You're muted.
Sippy, you're muted.
I'm going to take one more deep breath. What I was saying is that I'm rushing around because not only do I have work to do today, but we got Shabbat tonight and Shavuot Sunday. So there's lots of cooking to do and lots of to be thinking about. And then the internet going out did not help me. So we're trying out this new live transcript that Zoom has because I wanted to see how it was working. And I'm hoping this will make it a better experience if anybody who has hearing issues or just some people will follow along better. So that's something new. So let's jump into it. I'm going to share my screen. We'll see how the subtitles work with screen sharing. I haven't tried that yet. Hi, Aggie, welcome. Okay, LOMED. LOMED Shavuot. So as I said, Shavuot begins tomorrow night. No, Sunday night, which is 2 days from now. So here we go. Would somebody like to read us this quote from the book of Exodus?
I can do that.
Thanks.
Let them be ready for the third day, for on the third day God will come down in the sight of all the people on Mount Sinai. You shall set bounds for the people around, saying, beware of going up the mountain or touching the border of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death. No hand shall touch him, but he shall be either stoned or shot. Beast or man, he shall not live. When the ram's horn sounds a long blast, they may go up on the mountain. Moses came down from the mountain to the people and warned the people to stay pure, and they washed their clothes.
Okay, so we're looking at this totally out of context. Can anybody tell me what's going on? What's going to happen on the third day? Where are they? Who's around the mountain? Why can't they go near it? May have any ideas what's going on?
They're getting the 10 Commandments.
They're about to get the 10 Commandments. Okay, and who's they?
The Jewish people.
The Jewish people, the Israelites. And this is 49 days after the day they're going to get the Torah. So this is 46 days, I suppose, but since they've left slavery in Egypt, right? It has not been so long since they left slavery. And this is what God tells Moses to tell the people. Why do you think God didn't want the people touching Mount Sinai? I mean, it's pretty strong, right? If you touch it, you're going to be put to death. That's pretty strong. Why do you think that God said stay away from the mountain? There's no right or wrong answer here. All right, well, let's keep going and see if maybe we come up with an answer by the end. So the Jewish holidays, many of them have many ways we can look at them, right? And one of them is historically. So Shavuot is observed on the 6th and the 7th day of the Hebrew month of Sivan. Okay, so this year it's going to be the 17th and 18th of May. Interestingly, it is the one holiday in the Torah that is not given a date. It doesn't tell us what month it's in. What the Torah tells us is that we have to count 49 days from after Passover. And when we get to the 50th day is Shavuot. Now we know it's the 6th and 7th of Sivan because that's how many days after Passover you get to 50 days. But it's interesting, it doesn't give the exact number. Another name for it is called Zman Matan Toratenu, which means the time of the giving of our Torah. because it commemorates the giving of the 10 Commandments and the Torah on Mount Sinai. So that's the historical aspect of the holiday. If I say anything you don't understand, if you have questions, please feel free to jump in. All right. Adina, you want to read this one?
When you enter the land that your God has given you as a heritage, and you possess it and settle in it, you shall take some of every first fruit of the soil, which you harvest from the land that your God has given you. Put it in a basket and go to the place where your God will choose to establish God's name. You shall go to the Kohen in the charge at the time and say to him, I acknowledge this day before the Lord your God, and I have entered the land that the Lord swore to our fathers to assign us.
So this is the other reason I need to take a deep breath. In addition to getting ready for Shabbos and Shavuot, I know all of our hearts and minds right now are with Israel and thinking about the violence that is going on there and the people spending, who are stuck in bomb shelters and the death and destruction. And it's just heartbreaking. So I want to dedicate our learning today to the people in Israel, that everyone should stay safe and that the violence should end soon. So this is from the book of Deuteronomy, and God is saying to the Jewish people before they've even entered the land, that when you get to the land and you settle into it, you're going to do something special with the first fruits, right? The first fruits that you harvest, they belong to God. They're not for you. So here's an interesting question. How did they know which fruits were first? If you go outside and you have a tree filled with oranges, how are you going to know which one is the first fruit? So this is an interesting thing. This harkens us back to the holiday of Tu B'Shvat, which is the New Year's for the trees, which is in January or February. When the very first blossoms would come on a tree, the farmers would go out and tie a ribbon or a string or something around the branch where the first blossoms were. And so then they would know when the fruit came that those were the first fruits of the tree. Kind of cool, huh? All right, so what does the first fruits have to do with Shavuot? So on the spiritual level, Shavuot is also called Chag HaBikurim, which means the holiday of the first fruits. So this was the time of year when first fruits were brought up to the Holy Temple in Jerusalem as an offering. There are 3 pilgrimage holidays in the Jewish calendar. There are 3 holidays where Jews from all over would go to Jerusalem and make special sacrifices for the holiday. So one of them is Shavuot. They bring the first fruits. One of them is Sukkot, when they would bring like the fall harvest, right? The bounty of the harvest. And the other is Pesach, when they would bring the grains that they were offering then. Questions, comments? Michaela, you want to read us this one from Exodus?
Yeah, absolutely. The feast of the harvest of the first fruits of your work, of what you sow in the field, and the feast of ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather in the results of your work from the field.
Okay, so this is telling us what I was just telling you about the different things that would be brought to Jerusalem. So agriculturally, Shavuot is called Chag HaKatsir. So because that means the hot harvest holiday, and this is the time of the wheat harvest at this time of year. This is when they're harvesting wheat. Yeah, when you celebrate these holidays in Israel, if you live on a kibbutz or a moshav or somewhere where they're doing farming, the holidays make a lot more sense, right? We can connect more to them in terms of what's happening there. Darla, you want to read us this one from Leviticus?
From the day on which you bring the sheaf of elevation offering, the day after the Sabbath, you shall count off 7 weeks. They must be complete. You must count until the day after the 7th week, 50 days. Then you shall bring an offering of new grain to God. So
this is what I was talking before, that we don't have the date of the holiday in the Torah. It just tells us the 50th day. So really interesting thing that the counting is, we're counting, they call it the Omer. And the Omer was a measure of the barley that was brought right after Passover. So an interesting thing when we count the Omer, and it literally is a mitzvah every single night during these 49 days to count. The question is, what are you counting? And if you look at this text, it tells you to count 7 weeks, but it also tells you to count the 49 days. And so when we count the Omer, we count the days and the weeks. So for example, last night we said, today is 47 days, which is 6 weeks and 5 days of the Omer. Like that's how you count it. You count the days and the weeks. So communally, the Shavuot marks the end of this time of Sfirat HaOmer that we began counting after Passover. And the name Shavuot, which we call this holiday, actually means weeks, right? Because it's 7 weeks later. And these were the 7 weeks when the Israelites were preparing themselves to receive the Torah, right? They had to kind of leave slavery behind and start thinking about what it meant to be a people and get ready for the Torah. Sfirat HaOmer is also historically it's a sad time in the Jewish calendar. There was a plague that swept students of Rabbi Akiva, and lots of them died. And so it's kind of a sad time. So it's a kind of a time of semi-mourning. Some people won't listen to music during these 49 days. Often weddings aren't held during these days. So it's kind of a serious time. And then we get the joy of Shavuot. And just like Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot are kind of all linked together as one kind of group in the holidays, Passover to Shavuot are also kind of connected. This is one time. Shavuot is kind of the end of that whole season of holidays. Questions or comments? Okay, sorry, quiet group today. Okay. So this is a quote from a book called the Guide for the Perplexed, excuse me, by Maimonides. Let's see, Marilyn, you want to read this?
The Feast of Weeks is the anniversary of the revelation on Mount Sinai. In order to raise the importance of this day, we count the days that pass since the preceding festival, just as one who expects his most intimate friend on a certain day counts the days and even the hours. This is the reason why we count the days that pass since the offering of the Omer, between the anniversary of our departure from Egypt and the anniversary of the law giving. The latter was the aim and object of the Exodus from Egypt. And thus God said, I brought you unto myself. Exodus 19:4.
Thanks. Yeah, it's always interesting. It always strikes me as kind of backwards. Like when you're getting ready for a big event, right? The last day of school, your birthday, a trip, whatever. Usually we count down the days. 10 more days, 9 more days, 8 more days. But when we're counting the Omer and we're counting toward Shavuot, we're counting up, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. And I don't know. Anybody have thought about why that would be? Why we're counting up instead of down?
I wonder if there's any connection with the fact that it's Mount Sinai. What do you think about counting up? The first thing that came to my mind was a mountain.
A mountain and going up. That's interesting. Yeah, and I think on a metaphorical level too, like I think we're building up to something, right? I think when you're counting down the days, like you're counting down the days, like you want the time to pass so you get to the thing. And I think in this time we're counting the days because we're building up in holiness and in readiness for this amazing time. Nice. All right. I would say Shavuot is probably one of the lesser known Jewish holidays, even by Jews. So why is that? So it's in the summer or the beginning of summer when school is almost over. So whether your kids go to preschool or a day school or a Sunday school, sometimes it happens after school's even out. And so you run out of time to teach it. It has less rituals, right? On Sukkot, you sit in a sukkah and you wave the lulav. And on Passover, you have a seder and you eat matzah, There's nothing like that for Shavuot. There's not quite as much concrete traditions. And it's more synagogue-based than home-based. If you think of Sukkot, building a sukkah in your backyard, you think of Passover being all together with the family, Shavuot is really you go to synagogue so you can hear the 10 Commandments. So I think all those reasons are why it's lesser known. Who hasn't read yet? Michaela, have you read? Read anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say I have, but I'm happy to again, no problem. I don't know if I'm going to know how to pronounce everything though, so please feel free to correct it.
No problem.
All right. Rabbi Pinhas said in the name of Hoshea, while the king sat at his table. While the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be he, sat at the heavens. He arrived early, as it is stated, and it came to pass on the third day when it was morning. This is like a king who decreed, on such a day, I am going to enter the province. But the people of the province slept all through the night, so that when the king arrived and found them asleep, he set trumpets and horns to get them up. And the minister of that province woke them up and took them to meet the king.
So anybody know what this has to do with Shavuot? So the night before the Israelites were supposed to get the Torah, they also stayed up all night preparing, and then they overslept. And God was, they were ready to give the Torah to the Jewish people, and they were still sleeping. And because of that, we talked about the pilgrimage holidays already. There's a tradition on Shavuot, the first night, to stay up all night studying. And it's really, and this is the wrong date. That was a date from last year, I apologize. So Sunday night, there's a tradition to stay up all night studying to make up for the fact that we overslept all those years ago. The name of that practice of staying up all night studying is called a tikkun. And for years I had gone to a tikkun and stayed up all night studying, and I never thought about the connection between why it's called a tikkun and why we stay up all night. And the word tikkun, it's like the word tikkun olam. It means to correct, like to correct a mistake. So literally by staying up all night studying, we are correcting the mistake our ancestors made by oversleeping. But it's also a really fun thing to do, to stay up. Usually there's food and it's social. I'm very excited this year because last year there was not a Tikkun Leil Shavuot, right? There were some online, but I didn't do that. So I'm very excited this year. Our synagogue is doing one again, and I'm going to do some teaching, and it should be a lot of fun. The other commandment for Shavuot is to hear the 10 commandments read in synagogue. So they read it out of the Torah. Usually the congregation will stand while the 10 commandments are read, and you're supposed to feel like you're actually at Mount Sinai hearing the 10 commandments. Because according to tradition, the moment the Torah was given on Mount Sinai, the soul of every single Jew who would ever live was there at Sinai. So this is a spiritual experience that all of us have had in our souls. And so when we go back to synagogue and hear the 10 commandments, we're sort of reliving that. Questions or comments? So another tradition, very fun tradition for Shavuot, is to eat dairy foods, cheesecake, ice cream, blintzes, which are what are pictured there, which is like a dough filled with usually cheese or sometimes fruit. So why? What's the deal with dairy foods? And there are a few different opinions. So one is that when the Jews got the Torah on Mount Sinai, this is the first time they had the laws of keeping kosher. And they couldn't slaughter any animals because it was Shabbat, because the Torah was given on Shabbat. And they didn't have kosher dishes. And so they ate dairy, which have less, rules around the laws of kosher. Another reason we do is that they say that the Torah is often compared to milk, right? It nourishes us like milk does. And my favorite is the Hebrew word for halav has a numerical value of 40, which is the number of days that Moses was on Mount Sinai getting the Torah. So that's kind of a cool connection. But, any excuse to eat cheesecake is a good one.
I have a question, Tiffy.
Yeah.
Did the Jewish people not keep kosher before they received the Torah then?
So this is such an interesting question. Now, for sure, in the desert they were, because they were eating manna, right? So that was not an issue. But in Egypt, I don't think so. Although there are some rabbis who believe that our patriarchs, right? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, that they kept all the commandments, even though they hadn't been given yet. But it's a hard thing to understand. It's hard to think about. So most people would tell you, no, they weren't keeping kosher yet. This was a new thing. They had an awful lot of new laws to understand and to start keeping. Shabbat, they already had. Like, there were laws that they got before this point. They had Shabbat, but kosher, they did not. Great question. Thanks, Ariana. So sometimes people will decorate the synagogue with like flowers and greenery. It's especially done a lot in Israel. And this is actually a really neat midrash that it says that when the Torah was given, Mount Sinai and the desert around them bloomed with flowers, right? They're in the middle of the desert. There weren't usually much growing there, and suddenly it was blooming. The other thing that happens on Shavuot on the second day is the Yizkor service, which is remembering people who have passed away. It's held 4 times a year, on Yom Kippur, Shmini Atzeret, which is the end of Sukkot, the last day of Passover and the second day of Shavuot. And it's a very sacred service, specifically for people who have lost one of their parents, but also for people who have lost other people. We say the Kaddish prayer for the person who's died. It's a very emotional process. And another tradition on Shavuot is to read the book of Ruth. And that's usually done on Sunday night, on the first night of Shavuot. The story of Ruth took place at the same time of year as Shavuot. It happened during the barley harvest. And the book of Ruth is beautiful. If you've not read it, it's worth picking up. It's in the third section of the Bible, which is the writings. And Ruth was a non-Jewish woman. Actually, let's start with Naomi. So Naomi was a Jewish woman. She lived in Beit Lechem with her husband, Eli, and there was a famine. And they were wealthy people, but instead of staying and helping the people of Israel, they left. And they went to the land of Moab, who were enemies of the Jewish people, and they settled there. And they had two sons, Machlon and Chilion, and their sons married Moabite princesses, right? So non-Jews. And not long after they got there, Elimelech, the husband, died. And so now Naomi, his wife, is there with her two sons and her new daughters-in-law. Not too much later, both sons died. So now you have Naomi, who is a Jewish woman, who is alone in Moab, except for these two Moabite daughter-in-laws she has. And so she hears that the famine is over in Israel, and she says, I'm going to go back. And she decides to go back to her home, and she tries to say goodbye to her daughters-in-law. And the daughter-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, and she says, stay here. Stay here. This is your home. This is your people. Go back to your father's house. You'll find new husbands. You'll have children. Didn't have children yet. And you've been really good to me, but goodbye. And one daughter-in-law, Orpah, said, okay, bye, see you later, and goes back to her parents' house. And Ruth clings to her mother-in-law and says, I'm not going to leave you. There's a very famous quote, wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lie, I will lie. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. So she's really understood to be the first person who officially converts to Judaism. And she had such an amazing commitment to Naomi and to the Jewish people that we read it on Shavuot, because it's the kind of commitment that we hope Jewish people have to the Torah. Does that make sense? Questions, comments?
I have a question about a custom. When Shavuot came around while I was living in Israel, everybody was wearing flower crowns, and I hadn't seen that done in the States. And I'm wondering, you mentioned filling the home with foliage, but is that specifically where it comes from, or does it have another meaning? Yeah,
no, I think it's definitely connected to that. The holidays in Israel definitely have more of an agricultural pull, right? On Sukkot everywhere we build a sukkah, but when you do it in Israel, like having all the harvest, celebrating the harvest, etc. And on Shavuot, people will go out in the fields and they'll dance and sing. There's just this connection to nature in a way that we don't have as much here. But it definitely is, that's all connection, the flowers and greenery, whether it's the crowns or in the synagogue, yeah, for sure. So you should all get flowers for your Shavuot table. Confirmation is kind of a newer tradition for Shavuot. They call it different things in different congregations. Sometimes it's called affirmation, sometimes confirmation, sometimes Kabbalat Torah. There are probably other names I'm not thinking of. It started actually with the Reform movement in the late 1800s. When the Reform movement began, believe it or not, they got rid of the idea of a bar bat mitzvah, this coming of age ceremony for Jews at 12 or 13. They just got rid of it altogether, and they replaced it with confirmation. So the difference between confirmation and bar bat mitzvah is an individual something, right? It's something each child goes through themselves. Confirmation is done as a class, right? A whole group of 10th graders, usually at the end of 10th grade, come together and they affirm their commitment to Judaism. Very, very soon in the Reform movement, people realized they missed bar and bat mitzvah. They thought it was a good thing and they brought it back, but they kept confirmation. And I think the idea was, bar bat mitzvah, kids 12 or 13 years old, they're not really making much of a choice, right? Mom and dad says, here's what you need to do, and they do it. By the time you're 16, you're able to commit on a different way. And so it stuck. And it's usually done on Shavuot, sometimes in the evening, sometimes during the day, but it's a time for that age teenagers to come together and affirm their commitment to Torah. Anybody have anything to add about confirmation? Orthodox synagogues, by the way, usually don't do confirmation.
I was just going to ask, so is it only Reformed congregations that do confirmation, or do conservative as well?
It definitely has moved into the conservative movement. And I think some Reconstructionists, so it definitely is something that's spread, but I'm not sure I've ever seen an Orthodox synagogue that does confirmation. So we talked a little bit about Shavuot HaOmer. That was a sad time. I told you 24,000 of Rabbi Akiva's students died at those times. So we mentioned these, we talked these about already. So Lag BaOmer, I think I have these dates wrong. I think I didn't go back and change the, is the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer. And that's the day that Rabbi Akiva's students stopped dying. It's also the Yortzeit, the anniversary of the death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who wrote the Zohar, which is this Kabbalistic book. And before he died, he went to his students and he said, I don't want you to be sad on my Yortzeit, on the day I die. I want you to celebrate. I want you to have picnics and bonfires and celebrate. And so Lag BaOmer became that. So we have picnics and archery and bonfire. It's a time when a lot of 3-year-olds boys get their first haircut. That's a tradition in the Orthodox community to not cut a boy's hair until he's 3 years old. It comes from a tradition in the Torah that says you can't eat fruit from a tree for the first 3 years. For the first 3 years, that fruit just stays on the tree and it's holy. In the 4th year, it's given to God. And then after that, you can eat from it. And so this is tradition of cutting the hair for the first time when they're 3. So why does it happen on Lag BaOmer? Well, during the time of Shavuot HaOmer, it's a time when people don't get their hair cut. So anybody whose third birthday fell in the middle there couldn't get a cut until Lag BaOmer. So there's a big rejoicing and a bunch of boys get their hair cut the first time. And the mourning practices are lifted that were going on during Shavuot HaOmer. Lag BaOmer is going to take on, I think, a new meaning from now on, because any of you who saw about the horrible tragedy in Meron in Israel a few weeks ago, Meron is where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is buried. And so that's why so many people go on a pilgrimage to Meron on Lag BaOmer. And if you saw any of the news clippings, it's supposed to be a very happy time with singing and dancing and bonfires and just a lot of joy. And this year it was marred by tragedy, right? There were too many people and there was a rush and people got trampled to death. And I do wonder how people will think about Lag BaOmer now. I think that there will be a heaviness in Lag BaOmer, I think. Questions, comments, thoughts? All right, now you got to participate. I want to see how many of the 10 commandments we can name. Let's try it this way. I want you to open up your chat and we're going to do what's called a mad tea party. Here's what happens with a mad tea party. I want you to type in as many of the 10 commandments as you can think of. Don't worry about them being in order, but don't hit enter. And at the same time, I'll hit enter and we'll see what we can get. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. You're trying to come up with 10. And don't hit enter. Just go ahead and write as many of the 10 commandments as you can.
Where are we writing?
You're writing as many, we're waiting because they want you to write as many of the 10 commandments as you can, and then I'm going to have everybody hit enter at the same time. Put them in the chat. It's okay. All right, why don't we go ahead and hit enter? Everybody hit enter. We'll see how many we got. Don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't covet, honor your parents, should not have other gods, don't lie, don't do adultery, We're doing pretty well. No murder, no covering, honor your parents. I think we're getting them all between all of you. I think we've got them all here, which is really good. Excellent. So I remember hearing as a kid, there was always a saying among the teenagers, if you try and name the 10 commandments, you get stuck at 9. The 10th one is the one you're most likely to break. All right, so let's see how you did. All right, the 10 commandments are in the Torah twice. They're in Exodus and in Deuteronomy, and there are some slight variations between them. They're still the same 10 commandments in the same order, but there's just some details that are different. So first one, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, right? So the first one, there's really nothing to do. It's just that you need to know that God is God. Second one is that you should have no other gods before me, right? Shouldn't make a graven image or any likeness that is in heaven, on the earth beneath, or is in the water or on earth. Can't bow down to them, can't serve them. Because, and we usually people don't hear this part, right? I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children of the 3rd and 4th generations of those that hate me, and showing mercy unto the 1000th generation of those that love me and keep my commandments. So there's some interesting things about this commandment. So first of all, this is the reason that you will not see, for the most part, in a synagogue, picture in the sanctuary where the praying is going on, any pictures of people, right? Because it says you shouldn't make any images of God. So not only are we not supposed to draw God, you don't really want a statue or a picture of a human being in a sanctuary where you're praying, right? You don't want to be looking at images of a person or usually animals either. So a lot of synagogues just have decorative, more mosaic type things in the sanctuary. There are people who take this very literally, right? And so there's some people in the Orthodox Jewish community who are not so into art, not so into representational art of people or animals, but I think for the most part, that's not the case anymore. But you don't want any kind of bowing down to idols or gods. What do you guys think of this idea that if somebody does something wrong, it says here that the 3rd and 4th generation, to the 3rd and 4th generation, God is going to hold them responsible for that evil. So if my great grandfather did something really, really bad, God is holding me in part responsible.
I always,
I was going to say, I hate to say it, but as much of what's going on in the world today, where present generations are being held or taken to task for what went on previously.
So there
I
is
don't
some
know
of that,
that-
right? We're thinking about the
I think-
responsibility.
I think so.
Aggie, you were about to say something, I think.
I think similar. I think that it reminds us that our actions have consequences and that we are accountable, and that our children will know what we've done and our grandchildren will know what we've done. And so we are supposed to be role models for the next generations.
So that said, we also need to know that there's teshuvah, right? There's repentance, and that God, the gates of repentance are always open, and God does forgive, right? So we shouldn't think of God as unforgiving. But on the other side of it, God says that God is going to show mercy to the 1000th generation, right? So if you do good, the merit of your ancestors, that's not just 3 or 4 generations, that's 1,000 generations. And in fact, every day when we pray to God, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, we're saying, or the God of Sarah, God of Rachel, Rebecca, and Leah. We're saying to God, hey, look, our ancestors did all this great stuff. Give us some of the credit for it, right? In their merit, be kind to us. All right, third one, don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain, right? Don't use God's name without a reason. This is one that is just, I think, so totally ignored in our world today, right? Like, OMG, oh my God. People say it all the time. People say God's name without even thinking about it. This is one that doesn't seem to hold much water in our world today. And I'm not sure what that says or why. Remember the Sabbath day, right? So that's coming up tonight. 6 days you should labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shouldn't do any work, not you, not your son or daughter, your servants, your animals, the stranger within your gates, right? Shabbat is for everyone. I was reading something recently that talked about Shabbat is the most equalizing force in the world, right? There's no higher or lower, there's no boss and worker, everyone gets Shabbat. Why? God made the Lord, made heaven and earth and everything in 6 days and then rested on the seventh, made the seventh day holy. The other thing I love to think about Shabbat is, I heard this metaphor once, like a painter. When you're making a painting, you keep working. At some point, you got to step back and get perspective before you know what else the painting needs. So Shabbat is our chance to step back from the canvas, to stop working, stop being creative, and refresh and look at what we're doing and be ready to move on. All right. Let's go. Oh, honor your father and mother so that your life will be long in the land which God has given you. So this is the only the 10 commandments that gives a reward to it. If you honor your parents, you're going to have a long life. So there's a little incentive there. All right, so then we got the don'ts, right? Don't murder. I do want to point out that it says don't murder, not don't kill, right? There are times when we are allowed to kill, and there are times when it's even our responsibility to kill, right? If it's self-defense, if somebody is trying to kill you, you not only have the right, but the obligation to defend yourself, right? So it's not that you can't ever kill. You shouldn't murder. You shouldn't kill someone without reason. Shouldn't commit adultery. Don't steal. There are a lot of rabbis who say that this is not actually about stealing property. It's not like stealing a car or stealing your cell phone. It actually refers to kidnapping. And why do the rabbis say that? Because everything else on this list is very, very serious, right? Murder and adultery, bearing false witness. They said stealing, it's actually talking about stealing a person. It's saying don't kidnap. Don't bear false witness against your neighbor, right? Don't lie in court. And finally, you shouldn't covet your neighbor's house or their wife or their manservant or their maidservant or their ox or their donkey or anything else that is your neighbor's. So coveting, to be clear, it's not just jealousy, right? Coveting is not like, wow, that person has a really big house. I would love to live in that big house. I've been walking a lot and the weather's good. We keep walking by Lake Drive and we see these magnificent, beautiful houses. Saying, oh, I really love that house. I sort of wish I had a house like that. That's not coveting. Coveting is saying, that person doesn't deserve that house. I should have that house instead of that person because I'm better and I deserve it more. And I wish I could take it away from them because I deserve it more than they do. Right? It's not just wanting it for yourself, but it's wanting the other person not to have it. Questions or comments? So I'll tell you an interesting story. When I was in high school, I had a good friend who was Lutheran. And for I don't know what reason, we were on the phone one night and we were talking about the 10 Commandments. And we were arguing about what number commandment it was to, I think, honor your parents. And I'm like, okay, I'll pull open my Bible and I'll find it. And so first we were having an argument about the specific language of it. And I said, well, let me look in the Hebrew and I'll see what it says. And she said, why? I said, well, because the Bible was originally written in Hebrew. And she's like, no, it wasn't. This was a really, really smart girl. I said, well, what language do you think it's written in? And she said, English. I'm like, I don't think English existed at the time the Bible was written. Anyway, we kept arguing about what number commandment it was. And we didn't resolve it. And it wasn't until years later that I found out that Jews and Christians don't number the 10 Commandments the same way.
That's
right? Because in the 10 Commandments, when it's in the Bible, there's no numbers, right? It doesn't say commandment number 1, commandment number 2, commandment number 3. They all run together in several verses. And so they divide them up differently. So they have the coveting is 2 separate ones. The coveting your neighbor's stuff is one, and coveting your neighbor's wife is a different one. And they put together, pretty sure I am the Lord your God, together with don't have false gods before me. So it's it's not even consistent among the branches of Christianity. I think Orthodox Christians and Catholics do it different than Protestants. Should look it up sometime, but it's a very interesting thing. It's all the same commandments, they just number them differently. All right, we'll see if we have time for a few midrashim, a few interpretations from the rabbis related to Shavuot. Any comments or questions before we jump into this?
I have a question. Going back to some of the rabbis considering kidnapping as a commandment, is there any trend between different denominations of Judaism, or is that just like some rabbis? I'm just trying to get like how common that belief is.
So I'm pretty sure Rashi said it. I would have to look. And Rashi is like the kind of #1 commentator, rabbinic commentator, because he has comments on like virtually the entire Bible. I'm pretty sure that was Rashi. I don't think it's different denominations. It's just one interpretation. And Jews love to interpret things, right? So for, any given text, you can find hundreds and hundreds of different interpretations. And so this is just one of them. All right. Adina, you want to read this one?
Why watch ye enviously, ye many peaked mountains? This means a heavenly voice went forth and said to the mountains, why should ye be jealous of Mount Sinai? Am I saying ye right, or should it be pronounced ye?
You're fine. You're fine.
Ye, all great mountains, are blemished in comparison with Sinai. From this we may infer that a man who is arrogant is to be considered as blemished. Rabbi Yochanan said, whenever you find in the scripture a description of the greatness of the Holy One, praise be he, you find also a description of his modesty.
Okay. So this is an interesting one. So Mount Sinai, we're not exactly sure where it was, but according to the tradition, Mount Sinai was not a big mountain. It was not the biggest mountain in the area. It was kind of a smaller mountain. I mean, whenever you watch the movies, it looks like this enormous mountain, right? But it was kind of a hill, right? A big hill, a small mountain. It was not so big. And there's a story about why did God choose Mount Sinai, right? All the mountains were arguing with God. You should give the Torah on me. I'm the best. I'm the tallest. I'm the widest. I'm the strongest. And Mount Sinai didn't say anything. And so according to the story, God chose Mount Sinai because Mount Sinai was the humble one. So this is my favorite preschool song for Shavuot. Tells that story. All right. Marilyn, you want to read this one?
Okay. Well, I'm writing your words of wisdom down. Okay. The Israelites did not accept the Torah until the Holy One, blessed be he, arched the mountain over them like an empty bowl, as it is said, and they stood beneath the mountain. Is that Rabbi?
Yep.
Dibbi, the son of Hama, stated that the Holy One, blessed be he, told Israel, if you accept the Torah, well and good, but if not, your grave will be there. If you should say that he arched the mountain over them because of the written law, isn't it true that as soon as he said to them, will you accept the Torah, they all responded, we will do it here.
So before God gives the 10 commandments to the Jewish people, God says to Moses, go down to the Israelites, tell them I want to give them the Torah and ask them if they'll accept it. And Moses goes down to ask the people, and the people say, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. And we're going to look at a second midrash about why that is. But this is the rabbis struggling with the idea of the chosen people. Why did God choose the Jews? Why did God give us the Torah, not anybody else? So one explanation is we didn't even really want it. We were forced into it. God lifted the mountain over our heads and said, will you take the Torah? And we looked up and said, yeah, we will do and we will listen, because we didn't want to die, right? So this is one way of saying we're not so special. We it's not that we're so holy and we knew that we wanted the Torah. We took it under coercion, under threat. There's also a whole nother argument about the rabbis saying, if the only reason that we took the Torah was because we were threatened, then that's coercion and we're not really responsible for the covenant. And so according to the rabbis, it's okay because in the time of the story of Purim, we reaccepted it because it's part of the end of the Megillah when it says that the people, accepted all the laws. And so that says, if we were under duress the time of the Torah being given, we weren't during Purim. Okay, so here's the other midrash that's also dealing with the other side of that, of about how we should feel about being chosen. Aggie, you want to read this one?
Lest the nations of the world complain that God was unfair in not offering the Torah to the rest of the world, God did in fact offer it to all of the nations of the world and was turned down by all. God first offered it to the descendants of Esau. When God offered them the Torah, they asked, "What are these laws?" When God told them that one of its laws was, "You shall not murder," they said, "How can we accept the Torah? The law goes against our very nature," as Yitzhak said to our father Esau, "and you will live by the sword," in Genesis 27:40. God next offered it to Ammon and Moab, who likewise turned it down. They asked, "What are the laws of the Torah?" When they heard that immorality was one of its main
Immorality.
Immorality was one of its main prohibitions. They said, "Our national origins are bound up with a story of immorality between Lot and Lot's daughters and their sleeping father." Immorality has become part and parcel of our national character.
Right, it continues on. Darla, you want to keep going?
When God offered it to the descendants of Ishmael, they could not then, and they cannot now, deal with the prohibition against stealing. As the angel of the God said to our mother Hagar about our ancestor Ishmael, "He will be a person without self-control, without his hand in everyone else's property and everyone else's hand in his property, and he will camp on the borders of everyone else's land." It was only when God offered the Torah to the Jewish people that God found a nation with the potential to live according to all the laws of the Torah. And they realized this potential by saying to God, "Neseh v'nishma," sorry about that,
You're fine.
"We will first obey and then understand," when God offered them the Holy Torah.
So this is the other end of it, right? Yeah, it's not that we're so special, right? God offered the Torah to every single nation on earth. We were God's last choice. God offered to everybody. Nobody wanted it. And finally, when God came to us, the Jews didn't ask what's in the Torah. God said, "You want this?" And the Jewish people said, "Na'aseh v'nishma," we will do and we will listen. So it was our commitment and our willingness to jump in, right, and have faith that made us deserve the Torah. So these are kind of two different ways of looking at this idea of God choosing us. There's also, the fiddler on the roof model, right? When God says, could you choose another people once in a while? The idea that we're chosen for suffering and, painful.
So can I ask a question? When you hear about the Jews are the chosen people, can you talk about that a little bit?
So this is the struggle that we're talking about. So are we chosen to suffer? Are we chosen for the privilege of getting the Torah? When we're chosen for a lot of responsibilities, right? There's 613 commandments. There's a lot to do when you're a Jew. But bottom line is we're chosen for this special relationship with God. We have this covenant, right? God made promises to us and we made promises to God. What it doesn't mean is that we're the only people that have a special relationship with God, right? We were chosen for this connection and this relationship. That doesn't mean that God didn't choose other people in other ways for other relationships.
But isn't the converse of that also that we chose to follow?
For sure, right? We said Na'aseh v'nishma, so we absolutely chose back. And there are a lot of people in modern times who say that today every Jew has to choose to be Jewish, right? It's not like the time where whether or not we wanted to be Jewish, we didn't have much choice because the world was forcing us to be the other, right? Somebody now who doesn't want to identify as a Jew, you can leave it behind pretty easily. So every one of us has to really make a choice to stay Jewish. There are branches of Judaism that really don't like this idea of the chosen people. The Reconstructionist movement has wiped it out of their liturgy. When they're called to the Torah, it's the blessing, instead of saying Asher Bachar Banu, which means and God chose us, they say Asher Keraftanu, that God brought us close. So they really don't like the idea of the chosen people. So there are lots of ways of understanding it. Does anybody else have thoughts about this idea of chosenness they want to share? I do want to say one other thing. The idea of being the chosen people is very tied to being a light unto the nations. We were chosen not just to get this gift of the Torah, but to have a responsibility in the world and to be role models for the world in monotheism and in just behavior. So this is a special role that we were given by God. That's another way of understanding chosenness. All right, we have a couple more minutes. Aggie, you want to read this one?
And God said all of these things, saying, Rabbi Yitzchak said, what the prophets were to prophecy in the future in each generation, they received from Mount Sinai, as Moshe said to Israel in Deuteronomy 29:14, but with those here with us standing today and with those not here with us today. It does not say with us standing today, but rather with us today. These are the souls that will be created in the future who do not have substance, about whom standing is not mentioned.
So this is the idea we were talking about before, that every single soul was at Sinai and heard God give the 10 commandments, that it was a gift to all of us, and that all of us committed to Na'aseh v'Nishma, every Jew, every Jewish soul. And I think that is my last one, which is good considering it's 12:56. Any other questions, comments, thoughts about Shavuot? Plans you've got for Shavuot? Who's going to eat a cheesecake?
Cheese blintzes.
Cheese blintzes, yum. I found a Weight Watchers cheesecake recipe, so I'm going to try that out and see how it is. All right. Well, with that, I will wish you a Shabbat Shalom and a Chag Sameach, and I hope that you enjoy your Shavuot. If nothing else, take some time and read the 10 Commandments.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.